Hi everyone. Tonight, let's travel back in time to a world where warmth, light, and nourishment all came from the same source, the fire. Imagine stepping into a medieval hall at dusk, when the sun has already sunk behind the fields and the sky outside is painted the color of smoke. Inside, everything glows amber and gold from a single roaring hearth. Sparks dance upward toward rafters blackened by centuries of soot, and the air feels thick, alive, and heavy with wood smoke. You can almost taste the warmth before you feel it. It's the smell of survival, of dinners that took hours, of wet clothes drying, of homes that breathed fire instead of electricity. But before we sink into that world of glowing embers and bubbling pots, take a second to like this video, subscribe if you love quiet history told slowly, and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Then dim your lights, pull your blanket close, and let's begin. The first thing you notice in any medieval home isn't the furniture or the walls, it's the fire. It burns not in a tidy fireplace, not behind glass, but openly in the center of the room, right on the packed earth floor. Flames curl upward, unrestrained, painting everything in flickering orange light. The hearth isn't just a tool here, it's the beating heart of life itself. Around it, people gather not only to cook, but to live, to dry their boots, to warm their bones after a day in frozen fields. There's no chimney above you, only a smoky vent carved into the thatch or stone roof. The smoke rises in hesitant threads, never fully escaping, drifting sideways through the room like a ghost. Your eyes sting, your throat catches, but you begin to understand in the Middle Ages, every meal came with smoke. It was a price no one questioned. The iron pot hanging above the flames is black with soot, its chain groaning gently as it sways. Inside are thick stew bubbles, barley, onions, maybe a shred of salted pork if the family is lucky today. It hisses, spits, and releases that deep, earthy perfume of food cooked slowly and shared by everyone. You listen to the rhythm of it, the soft plop of boiling, the creak of the chain, the occasional crackle of a log splitting, and you feel time slow down. The fire does more than feed. It dries soaked woolen clothes, keeps tools from rusting, and warms the water for ale brewing. It even guards against unseen evils. For medieval minds, the fire's smoke wasn't just physical protection, but spiritual, a light against darkness, a sign that the house was alive. If you look closely at the people here, the mother crouching low to stir the pot, the children rubbing their hands near the coals, the old man nodding half asleep on a stool, you begin to see that the fire is family. It connects everyone. Even the smell, that thick, smoky scent that clings to skin and hair, is part of what home means. When the day ends, they don't extinguish the flame. Instead, they bank the embers carefully under ash, protecting them through the night like treasure. In the morning, a single breath can bring it back to life. To lose the fire is to lose warmth, food, safety, to let darkness win. So the hearth isn't just where food is cooked, it's where hope is kept alive. Outside, frost whitens the thatch. Inside, the stew thickens. A wooden spoon dips in, lifts out, and you watch steam curl up and vanish into the smoky air. You realize this isn't primitive at all. It's perfection in its own raw way. A system older than memory, still working, still alive. The air inside the cottage feels alive. Not clean, but moving. Heavy with invisible rivers of smoke that twist and fade into shadow. You blink through it, your eyes watering, your lungs tightening slightly, and you realize that this is what dinner felt like for millions of medieval people. There were no chimneys yet, at least not for most, only the hope that the smoke would find its way out through a hole in the roof, or through gaps in the thatch that looked more accidental than designed. Sometimes it escaped, sometimes it didn't. The walls are dark, not painted, but stained, each plank and rafter carrying the memory of years of cooking fires, layer upon layer of soot turning wood black and glossy like oil. The rafters above you are hidden behind this fog of smoke, and when a draft blows through the door, you can see it swirl in slow, lazy ribbons that never seem to settle. The family moves through it as though it isn't even there. The mother coughs gently, wipes her eyes, stirs the pot, hums to herself. The children laugh and chase each other near the doorway where the air is clearer. You wonder if they even notice it anymore. If the body learns to breathe through haze the way we adjust to a candle's light. Historians still debate whether medieval lungs simply endured it or adapted somehow. Either way, they lived and cooked in it, day after day, as though smoke was as natural as sunlight. Some households, clever or desperate, tried to tame the problem. Above the fire they hung wooden hoods or woven mats, hoping to funnel the smoke upward, makeshift chimneys that sometimes worked and sometimes caught fire themselves. Others built angled planks beneath the roof, like sails to coax the smoke out of a vent. It gave the room a strange geometry, a ceiling made of blackened shapes guiding grey ghosts. The smell is thick. Wood, meat, damp wool, sweat, everything blending into a scent that clings to your clothes like memory. Even bread baked on the hearth carries that smoky aftertaste. For the medieval peasant, this wasn't unpleasant. It was familiar. It was home. And then there were the strange solutions that make you smile in disbelief. Some families built small lofts just beneath the roof where the smoke gathered most heavily, not only for hanging meat to cure but sometimes for sleeping. The air was unbearable, yes, but the insects hated it, and a smoky night meant fewer bites. You imagine climbing up to such a place, eyes watering, lungs protesting, and realizing that the peace of no mosquitoes might be worth the sting of every breath. If you run your fingers along the wall, they come away black, sticky with resin and soot. You wipe them on your tunic, leaving streaks like charcoal. Everything inside the house carries this mark. Pots, spoons, even the people. The smoke doesn't just fill the room, it lives in it. But there's a strange beauty here too. The darkness of the rafters glows in the firelight, deep amber against black, like the inside of an old violin. Shadows flicker and dance across faces, and the orange pulse of the hearth turns every movement into something alive. The smoke may sting your eyes, but it softens everything. The edges of faces, the hardness of the walls, until the whole world feels blurred, like memory itself. When night comes, the family huddles closer, half because of warmth, half because of habit. The fire burns lower, its glow steady and deep. There's no glass window, only a shutter closed tight against the wind. The air grows thick enough to see, but no one complains. In the corner, the mother banks the embers with practiced care, pressing ash over them with her hand to keep the warmth alive until morning. It's strange, you think, that a world so smoky could feel so peaceful, yet in the slow rhythm of the fire and the crackle of damp logs, you begin to understand why people called this the heart of the home. In a place where the cold could kill, where storms clawed at thatched roofs and food was never guaranteed, a little smoke in your lungs was a small price to pay for light, warmth, and the promise of another dawn. You blink the smoke from your eyes and your gaze drifts downward, toward the scattered treasures of the medieval hearth, not jewels or coins, but the humble instruments of daily survival. They lie half buried in ash and straw, blackened by years of use, gleaming faintly in the orange light like relics of forgotten ritual. Here every object has a story. Every dent, scorch mark and crack is a record of meals cooked and winters endured. You pick up a clay pot, coarse, uneven, handmade without polish or decoration. Its surface feels rough beneath your fingertips. Its sides bulge slightly, imperfect but alive. It has been set too close to the flames too many times. You can see where fire has licked its belly and left a pattern of soot that looks like smoke captured in stone. It smells faintly of onions and barley, the ghosts of past stews soaked deep into its pores. Clay was the friend of the poor, cheap, plentiful, and patient. A pot could crack, but even then it was patched with metal staples or mud and pressed back into service. In a world where nothing could be wasted, every pot was a survivor. Next to it, An iron cauldron squats like a small black animal, heavy, enduring, indestructible. Its legs are stubby, meant to stand among embers rather than above them, so the heat can lick its belly from all sides. You lean close, and the iron breathes warmth back at you. Inside, a thin stew simmers quietly, its bubbles rising and breaking with small, steady sighs. The cauldron's rim is crusted with soot, its handle worn smooth by 100,000 grips. For generations, this same pot might have fed a family, barley thickening, beans softening, a scrap of pork melting into broth that smells like comfort. A curious glint catches your eye, not from gold or silver, but from a row of tiny decorative marks etched along the rim. Archaeologists find them sometimes, these small, joyful flourishes carved by anonymous hands. A smiling face, a spiral, a pattern of leaves, proof that even in poverty people found ways to make beauty part of survival. Perhaps the cook who owned this pot wanted to be reminded that art could live even in soot and hunger. Nearby lies a long-handled iron pan, flat and shallow, the medieval version of a frying pan. Its handle stretches out so far that the cook could hold it safely away from the fire, her hands red and dry from heat, her wrists aching from hours of stirring. Sometimes it's sizzled with flatbreads or eggs, sometimes with onions and lard. When fat hits the hot metal, it spits and hisses, sending a faint spray of scent through the smoky air, and you realize that even medieval ears must have delighted in that same familiar sound, the whisper of food meeting fire. On the ground rests a mortar carved from stone, heavy and cracked, with a wooden pestle lying across its mouth. Someone used it to crush herbs and mustard seeds, pounding in a slow, rhythmic beat that filled the hall with a comforting thud. The sound blends with the bubbling of the pot, the creak of the chain, the low hum of voices. It's almost like a song, the music of survival. Garlic, salt, and herbs mingle into paste, releasing perfume that cuts through the smoke. You reach for a spoon carved from ashwood, blackened at the tip where it's touched the stew one too many times. It's not elegant, but it fits perfectly into your palm. In this world, a spoon is more than a utensil. It's an heirloom. Families share it, passing it hand to hand, dipping into the same pot, tasting together. Hygiene isn't the point here. Connection is. The same spoon that stirs the dinner might later feed the baby, or serve as a toy for a child who will one day inherit it. Against the wall, clay jugs sit in a neat row, their sides glossy with age, their rims sealed with wax or linen. They hold ale, milk, or broth, liquids precious enough to guard like treasure. The shapes are all different, slightly uneven, as though each one remembers the hands that shaped it. You can almost hear the potter's wheel humming softly, spinning earth into life. And then there are the knives, simple, sturdy, always nearby. No polished handles or engraved blades here, just iron ground to sharpness. A peasant's knife cut bread, chopped herbs, carved wood, even repaired tools. It was kitchenware, weapon, and companion all in one. The edge gleams faintly when it catches the firelight, a flash of silver in the dark. If you look around the room, nothing is stored neatly. The tools of cooking spill into every corner, spoons on stools, knives on benches, pots leaning against boots, pans stacked beside spinning wheels. There are no cabinets or drawers, no polished order, yet somehow it feels alive, full, human. The kitchen isn't a place apart, it is the whole house, the living heartbeat of work and warmth. You notice something else, the texture of ware. Every surface has been touched 1,000 times, scrubbed, mended, burned, cooled, used again. The medieval kitchen wasn't clean, but it was honest. There's something beautiful in the imperfection, the patched clay, the dented iron, the spoon with its handle slightly bent. And as you sit beside the hearth, the fire pops and hisses again, the sound folding into the quiet rhythm of the tools, the slow scrape of wood on iron, the drip of fat, the faint sigh of boiling water. It feels almost meditative, like a heartbeat that never stops. You realize that long before ovens or stoves, before thermometers or recipes, the true skill of cooking lay not in precision but in listening to the sounds of the tools, to the moods of the fire, to the soft voice of food itself. You lean back, your fingers still warm from the iron, and watch the cook work, her movements calm, unhurried, practiced. Fire, clay, wood, and iron. Nothing more, nothing less. It's all she has, and all she needs. The road outside the village smells faintly of ash and yeast, a scent so warm and ancient that it feels like memory itself. You follow it, past cottages with thatched roofs and smoking chimneys, to a low stone building set apart from the homes, the communal bakehouse. It hums softly with life, even before you step inside. The air around it vibrates with heat, laughter, and the gentle rustle of baskets wrapped in cloth. This is where bread, the soul of the medieval table, truly comes to life. Inside, the air is golden. The oven glows like a captured sun, a great domed structure of clay and brick that radiates steady warmth through the room. Its surface is cracked from years of use, a patchwork of soot and age. The fire that burned earlier has been scraped out, leaving a deep orange afterglow that you can feel in your bones. There's a low hum of conversation, villagers waiting patiently, baskets at their feet, the smell of raw dough mingling with smoke and anticipation. You watch a baker, sleeves rolled up, face flushed from the heat, take a long wooden peel, slide it deep into the oven's mouth, and pull it back with a loaf that crackles as it meets the cooler air. The crust is dark and firm, the scent so rich it nearly makes you dizzy. This moment, simple and small, is everything. Fire transformed into food, patience turned into sustenance. One firm fact recorded in medieval town rolls is that many villages shared these ovens rather than owning private ones. It was safer this way. Fewer house fires, fewer wasted logs, and more efficient. Families would prepare dough at home, kneading it on rough wooden tables, then carry it here wrapped in linen or tucked in wicker baskets. Each loaf bore a small mark, a slash, a twist, a carved symbol, to show whose was whose. That way, when dozens emerged golden and steaming, no one took their neighbor's bread by mistake. You can almost feel the energy of the place, not frantic, but communal. Old women gossiping softly about the weather, children darting between legs, dogs sniffing eagerly at fallen crumbs. The baker moves like a conductor, managing heat, timing, and space, every motion smooth and sure. Sparks leap each time he slides in a loaf, scattering like tiny stars before fading into ash. The rhythmic whoosh of the peel, the muffled crackle from within the oven, the quiet murmurs of waiting. Together they form a kind of music that feels older than language. But not everything about this warm ritual was free. In many towns, the bakehouse belonged to the local lord or monastery, and using it came at a price, sometimes in coins, sometimes in kind, a portion of each loaf paid as rent. You imagine the quiet frustration of a mother watching a piece of her family's dinner disappear into the baker's hands, knowing it's the cost of safety. Bread wasn't only food, it was a small act of surrender to power. Yet even within that system, there was joy. The bakehouse was gossip central. The medieval social media of its day. Here people exchanged news, laughed, grumbled about taxes, and shared tips for stretching flour or coaxing more rise from dough. The smell of baking softened tempers, and for a brief while, the whole village breathed in rhythm with the oven. When the loaves finally emerged, time itself seemed to pause. The heavy door swung open, heat rolled out in waves, and rows of bread sat glistening, their crusts splitting to reveal steam, rising like incense. The baker brushed ash from the bottoms with a bundle of wet rags, then called out names or marks, one by one. The villagers stepped forward to claim their creations, their faces glowing with pride. You watch as a woman tears a loaf open right there, the steam curling into the air. The inside is dense, dark, slightly sour, made from rye or barley. not the fine white wheat reserved for nobles. It's chewy, hearty, with a flavour that speaks of earth and labour and hunger held at bay. Children tug at her skirt for a piece, and she laughs, breaking off a crust for each. White bread made from sifted wheat flour is almost mythic here, the privilege of monasteries and manors. For everyone else, bread is brown or black, heavy enough to fill the belly but never soft. Still, it's sacred. In a world of scarcity, a single loaf is both blessing and guarantee, a sign that the community endures. A curious tradition lingers at the edge of the scene. Trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread used as edible plates. The baker keeps a few for sale. Yesterday's loaves, now hard as wood. These will be drenched with stew, then eaten or tossed to the dogs when soaked through. Bread in the medieval world is more than food. It's bowl, napkin, and sponge all in one. Outside, the crowd thins as villagers drift home, baskets lighter now, but hearts full. The sun has begun to set, and the smell of baked grain fills the street like a benediction. You step out into the cooling air, and the heat of the bakehouse still clings to your skin. The rhythmic labour of the oven, the chatter, the scent, it all feels deeply human, timeless. For a moment, you stand still and breathe it in. This is what civilization smells like at its simplest: smoke, flour, and patience. The communal bakehouse wasn't just where bread was baked, it was where community itself rose from the fire. You leave the quiet warmth of the village bakehouse and step into another kind of kitchen, one filled with noise, heat, and hierarchy. Inside a great hall, the air quivers with firelight. Flames roar behind an enormous hearth built of stone, wide enough for a man to stand inside. Shadows leap along the walls, dancing over tapestries and wooden beams blackened by years of feasts. Tonight, the smell isn't of barley or bread, it's meat. Rich, fatty, intoxicating meat, sizzling over open flame. Before you stands the spit, a long iron rod glinting dully in the orange light. It runs straight through the haunch of an animal, turning slowly, endlessly, while its juices hiss and crackle below. Fat drips into a wide pan, spitting against coals that glow like molten gold. This is the centerpiece of medieval luxury, the feast fire, the stage where status and labor collide. But the spit doesn't turn itself. Beside it crouches a boy, no older than 12, his hands red from heat, his eyes dull with exhaustion. He grips a wooden handle attached to the iron rod and turns it one slow notch at a time. Then another, then another. He will do this for hours. His cheeks shine with sweat. His hair clings to his forehead, and his breathing falls into rhythm with the turning meat. This is the turn-spit boy, the most invisible member of any noble household, condemned to circle that handle until the feast is done. Records from great houses tell us these boys worked long hours, often half-starved, their skin burned from the fire's glare. They turned the spit through every season, sweating in summer, shivering in winter. The Lord's guests would laugh and drink nearby, barely glancing toward the corner where labour and heat blended into silence. For the boy there was no reward, only monotony, and sometimes a sharp cuff if the roast burned. Yet not every spit was turned by human hands. In some households, especially in later centuries, small dogs were bred for the job. The turn-spit dog, short-legged and wiry, ran inside a wooden wheel mounted high on the wall, powering the spit through sheer effort. You can picture it, a panting creature pacing endlessly in its wooden treadmill, the wheel creaking as the roast spins steadily below. When one dog tired, another replaced it, like a living gear in a machine made of sweat and smoke. Guests would smile at the sight, amused by the novelty, unaware of the cruelty behind it. You glance back at the fire, its heat so intense it ripples the air. The boy's face is half-lit, half-shadowed, his expression unreadable, too tired to hate the task, too young to know how unfair it is. And yet, when the cook shouts to slow down or speed up, he obeys instantly, his arm moving with practiced precision. The whole rhythm of the kitchen depends on him, though no one will ever say thank you. The meat glistens as it turns, juices dripping into the pan below. The cook collects that fat carefully. It will be reused, poured over the roast for basting, or saved for sauces later. Nothing is wasted here. The scent fills the room, thick and heavy, almost dizzying. A single roasted boar could feed dozens, but what it truly feeds is pride. Roasting is expensive. It devours firewood, time and labour, and that makes it a declaration of wealth. At the far end of the hall, musicians tune lutes, servants polish goblets, and guests begin to laugh. None of them see the burns on the boy's forearms, the rawness of his palms, or the silent endurance it takes to keep the spit turning evenly, hour after hour. When the meat is finally ready, carved and carried out in triumph, the boy slips back into the shadows, forgotten, while applause rises for the cook and the Lord's generosity. Historians still argue whether these children were servants, apprentices, or expendable labourers, but every account agrees on one thing: they were invisible. They made the feasts possible, then vanished behind the smoke. As you stand there, watching the fire's glow deepen, you notice something strange: the hypnotic beauty of it all. The rhythm of the turning spit, the shine of the meat, the way light trembles across the walls. Even the suffering seems swallowed by the sound. The slow creak, the hiss, the gentle crackle of fat meeting flame. You close your eyes and imagine that endless turning. The boy counting the revolutions in his head, dreaming of sleep, of fresh air, of the stars beyond the chimney smoke. You can almost feel his small hand turning the handle through centuries, as though he's still here, in every memory of a medieval feast, unseen but always moving. The roast glistens one last time, golden and dripping, and you realize that behind every medieval banquet, behind every platter carried to candlelit tables, there were always tired eyes and blistered hands. The fire gave warmth and spectacle, but it also demanded its price in silence and labour. And as the boy wipes sweat from his face and leans against the hearth, you hear the cook call for another dish, a pot bubbling with barley and cabbage, something humble beside all this grandeur. That's where your eyes drift next, toward the quieter side of the kitchen, where the true meal of the common people still simmers patiently in shadow. You move away from the roaring feast fire and step toward the quieter corner of the kitchen where another sound takes over, a slow, gentle bubbling, soft as breathing. Here, in a squat iron cauldron half buried in embers, the true food of medieval life is cooking. No golden roasts, no spectacle, just a thick, humble stew called pottage, the dish that sustained Europe for centuries. You kneel beside it, and the warmth greets you like a sigh. The smell is earthy and comforting: barley, cabbage, onions, maybe a bone for flavour if fortune was kind this week. The surface ripples, blisters forming and vanishing again, and for a moment you understand why this simple pot was the beating heart of so many homes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. A meal that could feed a family day after day, endlessly replenished, endlessly forgiving. One firm historical fact is that pottage wasn't just a dish, it was a rhythm. Every morning someone added something: a scoop of grain, a few beans, a handful of herbs, a splash of ale. Nothing was measured, nothing precise. You cooked by instinct, by scent, by habit. The pot might never be fully emptied, only topped up, simmering constantly over the fire like a living thing. Some families even bragged that their stew had been bubbling since last winter, an unbroken chain of meals connecting seasons together. You stir the pot slowly with a wooden ladle darkened from years of use. The thick grains slide against the wood, the broth sighs, and a small hiss escapes as a bubble bursts. It's almost hypnotic, this gentle sound, the heartbeat of survival. For the poor this was dinner, breakfast, and sometimes medicine too. Herbs were thrown in not just for flavour but for health: sage for stomach aches, thyme for fevers, parsley for the breath of spring in the middle of winter. The smell grows stronger as you lean in. Barley thickens the broth until it feels more like porridge than soup. Carrots add sweetness. Onions. Depth. A single bone floats near the surface, its marrow long since melted into the liquid. It's astonishing how rich the scent becomes from so little. Proof that patience, not wealth, makes food taste like home. You glance up and notice how communal this space feels. People don't eat alone here. The same pot feeds everyone. Neighbors, family, children, each dipping their spoons, laughing, talking, breathing in the same warmth. Cleanliness isn't the goal. Togetherness is. The pot is both table and boundary, defining the circle of life itself. In wealthier halls, the same cauldron exists, only larger and more ornate. Cooks add wine, almonds, or spices to turn the pottage into something grander. A shimmering golden broth flavored with saffron, a display of taste and power. They serve it in polished bowls, sprinkle sugar on top, and call it art. But here by the hearth, it's still the same. A slow miracle of water, fire, and whatever can be spared. Historians still argue about its taste. Was it bland? Probably. Was it nourishing? Always. It was food that expected nothing, and gave everything slow warmth spreading through empty bellies, through cold evenings, through the long endurance of poverty. You dip an imaginary spoon into the pot, and the taste comes alive on your tongue, salty, soft, slightly bitter from cabbage, a whisper of smoke from the fire. It's not exciting, but it's real, grounding, forgiving, endlessly enough. The woman stirring it hums quietly, her song lost beneath the crackle of burning logs. She doesn't rush. This is food that cannot be hurried. Fire decides the pace, and she obeys. Children wait nearby, clutching wooden bowls, eyes half closed from the heat. When she finally ladles out the stew, steam curls around their faces like a blessing. A quirky custom persists in your mind, families dipping chunks of yesterday's bread into the broth to thicken it, turning one meager meal into two. The bread soaks up the flavor, softening into something rich and heavy, proof that resourcefulness was the greatest recipe of all. The pot keeps simmering, even after everyone has eaten. Tomorrow it will begin again. A new handful of barley, a new bone, a new prayer. The pottage never dies, it only changes shape, carrying the memory of every dinner before it. You sit back, listening to the faint popping of bubbles and the low murmur of voices. In that sound you hear the soul of the Middle Ages, quiet, smoky, enduring. It's not the music of feasts or nobility, but of life itself, slow and steady as the turning of the seasons. The fire crackles, and somewhere deeper in the hall, a voice calls for more salt meat, more dried peas, more patience. You stand, brush ash from your hands, and follow the smell of brine that drifts from the storeroom beyond the hearth. The next place where medieval ingenuity quietly kept hunger at bay. You follow the fading warmth of the hearth until the sound of bubbling fades behind you. The air cools, grows heavier, and carries a new smell, sharp, mineral, and unmistakably old. It's the scent of preservation, of salt, and smoke, and slow patience. You've entered the storeroom, a quiet sanctuary of survival where medieval families waged their daily battle against decay. It's dim here, lit only by the faint glow of embers seeping through a crack in the wall. Wooden beams creak above, and from them hang strings of meat, wrinkled and dark like old leather. Barrels line the floor in uneven rows, their lids sealed tight with wax or pressed down with heavy stones. The air feels alive with the memory of fire and brine. You kneel beside one of the barrels and lift its lid carefully. Inside, pale slabs of pork glisten in a pool of cloudy liquid. This is salt at work, invisible, tireless, miraculous. It draws the life from flesh so that life can continue somewhere else. The smell stings your nose, sharp and almost metallic, but underneath it lies something comforting. You realize this barrel isn't just food storage, it's a promise that in February, when snow covers the fields and nothing grows, a family will still eat. Salt was the quiet gold of the Middle Ages. Mines at Salzburg, evaporating pans along the coast, and caravan routes through dusty plains, all fed an economy built on the desire not to starve. Villages traded grain or wool for handfuls of it. Towns collected taxes in it. Entire wars were fought to control its sources. To own salt was to own time. The power to stretch summer into winter, abundance into endurance. You trace a fingertip through a thin line of white crystals scattered on a workbench. They glitter faintly, small and perfect. Somewhere hundreds of miles away, men are hacking these same crystals from rock, carrying them in sacks through mountains, each grain worth more than a coin. It's strange how something that burns your tongue can keep life sweet. Above you, sausages sway gently in the smoky air, their skins dark and tight. The smell here is richer, almost sweet, the perfume of months of fire curing. Every time the hearth burned, its smoke drifted upward into the rafters, wrapping around these meats, transforming them into food that would not rot. A peasant wife could hang her hams in the smoke and forget them for weeks, trusting the fire's invisible work. When hunger came, she'd slice thin shavings, tough, salty, but filling. Not everything in this room is meat. You run your hand over a sack of dried peas, hard as pebbles. These will soften in next month's pottage, swelling into small, starchy gifts. Next to them sits a basket of apples, layered in straw, their skins dull but still intact. Even fruit had its tricks. Apples packed in straw, plums dried into prunes, grapes shriveled into raisins, figs pressed into dense bricks of sugar and sun. You lift a small ceramic jar and pull out the cloth stopper. The sharp scent of vinegar hits you, sour, alive. Floating within are small green beans, pickled weeks ago. Vinegar was another kind of preservation magic, born from ale left too long. It transformed vegetables into treasures that lasted through winter, cutting through the heaviness of salted meat with its bright, biting taste. You can almost feel how refreshing it must have been. A small miracle of acidity in a season of dull flavors. Nearby, a row of earthenware jugs stands cool against the wall. Inside them rests ale, cider, sometimes even mead, liquid food for the long months ahead. Fermentation, too, was a kind of alchemy. Bubbles and time turned fragile harvests into something that lasted. Medieval people might not have understood the science, but they knew the signs, the hiss of life, the rising froth, the satisfaction of turning spoilage into strength. Everywhere you look, there's quiet care, a hand-stitched sack tied with twine, a jar covered with wax, a sausage turned slightly so it won't mold on one side. Preservation wasn't a single act. It was a daily vigil, stirring, checking, watching. A single spoiled barrel could mean hunger. A single successful one could mean life. And yet, even with all this, nothing lasted forever. Sometimes the salt lost its bite, or the brine grew cloudy, or the smokehouse grew damp. The family would gather, faces tight, staring down into a ruined cask. They would mourn it quietly, like a small death, then move on, back to the fields, back to the fire, back to the work of keeping tomorrow alive. It's humbling to realize how much of life then was spent not eating, but waiting to eat. Every cured ham, every dried bean, every raisin was a memory of summer, the sun's warmth preserved in salt and smoke. To bite into one in the dead of winter was to remember green fields and buzzing flies and life itself. You close the lid of the barrel and stand. The smell of salt lingers on your fingers, sharp and ancient. It's the scent of endurance. The fire might feed the heart, but this quiet room of barrels and beams is the breath that keeps it beating. When you step outside, the night air feels cold and startlingly clean. The smell of the storeroom clings to your clothes, a faint perfume of survival. Above, the stars burn pale and distant, reminders that the same sky looked down on every hungry winter that ever was. And as you glance toward the faint glow of hearth smoke rising from the cottages, you understand salt and fire, patience and care. These were the four elements of life in a world without machines. The story moves now toward the bustling noise of trade, to the markets and caravans where these same preserved foods began their long journey from coast to countryside, and where flavor met economy in a dance that would reshape the medieval world forever. Morning breaks grey and damp over the village, and you find yourself walking toward the sound of life, the ringing of voices, the bleating of animals, the clatter of wooden wheels over cobblestones. The market is awake. It is the beating heart of medieval life, a weekly miracle that gathers everything a family needs but cannot make: salt, fish, grain, herbs, gossip, hope. Long before supermarkets and aisles of packaging, this is where survival comes, wrapped in mud, noise, and the smell of smoke. As you step into the square, your senses are overwhelmed. Everywhere there is movement, traders shouting, dogs barking, geese scattering underfoot. The air is thick with scents: fresh-cut herbs, sour ale, fried batter, the brine of fish laid on wooden tables. A woman passes by carrying a basket so full of onions that their sharp scent cuts through everything else. Children tug at her skirt, laughing, barefoot in the mud. You move between stalls where merchants arrange their goods on rough planks or cloth-covered tables, turnips and carrots still streaked with earth, bundles of leeks and cabbages glistening with dew, sacks of barley spilling golden grains onto the ground. This is the true face of the medieval kitchen, not the quiet hearth, but the chaos before it, where hands bargain and trade to keep the fires fed. Markets like this were strictly regulated. Charters granted by lords or councils dictated the days and places they could be held. Stalls paid small rents, inspectors checked weights and measures, and taxes skimmed quietly off every coin that changed hands. And yet, beneath all that order, the market feels wild, human and unpredictable, pulsing with life. A fishmonger slaps a slippery eel onto the table beside you. It writhes for a moment, glistening like living rope. Children squeal, half afraid, half thrilled. Eels are popular here. They survive transport better than most fish, and on fasting days they are a prize. Beside the fishmonger, barrels of herring stand open, their smell strong enough to make your eyes water. A housewife leans over one, inspecting the shine of each fish before paying with a few small coins. Somewhere in a town miles inland, this same herring will end up in a pot of ale and onions, feeding a family who has never seen the sea. A few steps away, a man sells cheese from a wooden cart. His wares are wrapped in cloth, each wheel hard and pale, marked with thumbprints from pressing. The air around him is sweet and sour all at once. Cheese, like bread, is one of the small miracles of the age. Milk made immortal. Families barter wool or eggs for a wedge that will last weeks, sometimes months, hanging in the rafters until it hardens enough to grate. The spice merchant's stall stands out like a jewel amid the mud. Tiny boxes of wood hold colours so vivid they seem impossible. Red sandalwood, yellow saffron, brown cinnamon, black pepper. The scents swirl together into something almost divine. You watch as he measures peppercorns by the grain, his hands delicate and deliberate. The price, he mutters, would feed a peasant family for months. But still, customers come. Priests, traders, the occasional well-off widow, each buying a pinch to transform a simple meal into something unforgettable. You linger by a baker's stand where hand-sized pies steam in the morning chill. Their crusts are rough, golden, and bubbling with gravy that leaks through cracks. You realize these are the medieval version of street food. Portable, cheap, filling. Labourers grab one and eat as they walk, crumbs falling to the mud, eyes already on the next job. The smell of fried dough mingles with the air's cold dampness, and for a moment it feels as though time itself has stopped, caught in this eternal rhythm of hunger and satisfaction. Barter hums around you as much as words do. A woman trades a chicken for 2 loaves of bread. A shepherd offers wool for salt. Not all transactions are measured in coin. Sometimes they are measured in trust, reputation, or desperation. The market is more than commerce. It's conversation, negotiation, confession. A group of children runs past you, carrying bundles of herbs tied with twine, sage, rosemary, thyme. Their fragrance cuts through the heavier smells, bringing freshness to the air. These herbs are cheap and vital. Without them, the world would taste only of smoke and salt. You realize the same scents drifted through kitchens in every age, the quiet continuity of flavor connecting centuries. You pause near a tavern stall where ale is being ladled from a barrel into earthen cups. Everyone drinks it. Men, women, even children, because water is too risky. The ale is weak, cloudy and warm, but it's safe. Labourers gulp it down quickly, wiping foam from their lips, then move back to their work, their faces flushed with the faintest trace of happiness. The market isn't just about food. It's where life unfolds. Rumours spread faster than bread sells. Who's been called to war, who's marrying, whose cow has died, which lord is raising taxes again. The noise is constant, a tide of human voices rising and falling with the wind. And through it all runs one single truth. Without this chaos, the medieval kitchen couldn't exist. The hearth depended on this muddy square, on these trades and quarrels and jokes shouted over the din. Without the market, there would be no stew, no bread, no salt, no life. As the sun climbs higher, merchants begin to pack their goods. The ground is littered with scraps, trampled vegetables, spilled grain, fish bones glinting in the dirt. The smells linger, smoke, brine, ale, and humanity. You stand still for a moment, watching it fade into quiet. The market day is ending, but the life it fuels will burn through another week, another season, another century. You turn away, the echo of voices still in your ears, and follow the path that leads out of town, toward the quieter rhythm of home gardens, where food begins not with trade or coin, but with soil, sunlight, and a little hope. The road out of town softens under your boots, turning from stone to dirt, and the air begins to smell green again, damp soil, crushed grass, the faint sweetness of herbs. You pass the last cottage and step behind it into a world both humble and miraculous. The kitchen garden, small, uneven, fenced with twigs or woven branches. This patch of earth is the true foundation of the medieval meal. Here, flavor, healing, and survival are coaxed from the same soil. The first thing you notice is how alive it feels. Bees hum lazily between blossoms of sage and marigold. Chickens scratch near the edges, their feathers dusted with soil. The garden isn't neat or ornamental. It's a patchwork of usefulness. Leeks stand tall beside patches of cabbage. Parsley curls between rows of beans, and onions poke their green tips through the dirt. Every inch of space matters. You crouch and run your fingers through the soil. Cool, dark, soft. This earth has been turned and cared for by generations of hands, mostly women's hands, calloused and careful. It is said in monastery ledgers and household accounts alike that without these small gardens, peasants would not have survived the winters. The market fed the appetite, but the garden fed the soul, steady, loyal, and endlessly generous. Leeks are everywhere, the favourite of the medieval kitchen, sweet when boiled, gentle on the stomach. Their green stalks sway slightly in the breeze, patient and proud. Next to them, cabbages huddle low and round, their outer leaves darkened by frost. They are heavy, dependable, perfect for stretching thin stews into meals that fill the belly. Every household has them. Even kings, it was said, could not dine without cabbage. Farther back, small herbs thrive in shaded corners. Thyme, with its woody stems and tiny leaves, fills the air with its sharp scent, both food and medicine, used to season soups and soothe coughs. Sage grows thick and silvery, believed to bring wisdom and long life. Why should a man die, the old proverb goes, while sage grows in his garden? Fennel stretches upward, feathery and pale green, its seeds collected for both flavor and digestion. These plants are humble apothecaries, each one a healer disguised as seasoning. Children play between the rows, their laughter soft. They pull up carrots, still streaked with mud, and nibble them raw, wiping their hands on their tunics. A mother bends nearby, tying herbs into small bundles to hang from the rafters for winter. The air smells of crushed mint and warm soil, the scent of life sustained by patience. A curious detail catches your eye: bright marigolds blooming along the border. Their petals, orange and golden, gleam like tiny suns. These aren't planted for beauty alone. The petals are plucked, dried and tossed into soups to mimic saffron's golden colour, a trick of the poor to make a peasant's pot gleam like a lord's. Beauty and deception, all in one flower. Not far off, a row of garlic plants rises, each bulb buried in its small mound of earth. Garlic was medicine as much as food, crushed into pastes for wounds, boiled in milk for colds, rubbed on door frames to ward off sickness and spirits alike. Its sharp scent was protection, its flavour endurance. You pick one stalk, and its smell stays on your fingers long after you let it go. Beyond the herbs and vegetables, a patch of fruit trees leans against the sky, apple, plum, maybe a pear, if the soil is generous. Their branches twist low, heavy with promise. Fruit is precious here, not eaten fresh but dried, pressed or stored in straw for winter. A single apple in January can feel like a miracle, the taste of sunlight long gone. You pause near a small wooden trough, where water trickles from a bucket. A woman kneels, her hands deep in the mud, planting late seeds. Her movements are unhurried, steady, as though she has done this 1,000 times before. And she has. The garden is her craft, her insurance against famine, her quiet resistance against hunger. It is the uncelebrated half of cooking, invisible yet essential. Scholars still debate how diverse these plots were. Some claim the poor grew only what they must, onions, cabbage, and leeks. Others point to monastic and estate records filled with dill, chives, mint, celery, and even imported herbs from distant lands. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between simplicity but not monotony. Variety existed wherever hands were clever enough to coax it from the ground. The light softens as the day wanes. Smoke rises from distant chimneys, curling gently over the thatched roofs. In the fading glow, the garden glimmers, rows of green against brown earth, tiny leaves catching the last warmth of the sun. You understand now that this was more than a plot of land. It was an act of faith. Every seed planted was a prayer for tomorrow. You step back onto the path, the scent of time still clinging to your sleeves. Behind you, the woman keeps working, her silhouette bending and rising, a timeless rhythm that links centuries together. The same motion her grandmother made, and her grandmother before her, each one feeding the next generation one handful of soil at a time. As you walk toward the horizon, the evening air turns cooler, carrying with it a faint trace of something exotic. Pepper, maybe cinnamon, drifting from a merchant's wagon bound for a distant manor. It reminds you that while peasants grew their food from earth, others brought theirs from oceans and deserts. And so your journey drifts next to the far-off spice routes, where tiny flecks of scent and colour reshaped how the medieval world tasted its own hunger. By the time you leave the gardens behind, dusk has settled over the land. The scent of herbs still clings to your sleeves, but now it mingles with something sharper: pepper, cinnamon, cloves, drifting faintly through the narrow street of a merchant quarter. The air feels different here, heavier with wealth, mystery, and longing. Tonight, you step beyond the village into a network that stretches across deserts, oceans, and empires. The spice trade, the invisible thread that tied the medieval world together. You hear it before you see it: the creak of wooden carts, the shuffle of hooves, the murmur of foreign tongues. In a dimly lit stall, a spice merchant sits behind a small wooden counter. His table is modest, yet it holds more value than the houses that surround it. Tiny boxes lie open before him, filled with miracles: black peppercorns gleaming like beads of obsidian, cinnamon curled in bronze ribbons, nutmeg dark and smooth as river stones, and saffron, strands so light they could float, so costly they could ransom a man. The air is intoxicating. Every breath feels like gold dissolving on your tongue. Pepper is the king of this small empire, the most desired, the most traded. Imports from Venice to Bruges, Sacks of pepper are weighed like treasure, their worth measured grain by grain. Records tell of debts paid, rents settled, even dowries counted in peppercorns. Its path begins far to the east, in the humid forests of India, where vines climb trees taller than cathedrals, and ends here, in a world where the tiniest pinch transforms a meal from humble to noble. You imagine a cook somewhere dropping 3 grains into a pot of stew, smiling at the thought of luxury. Cinnamon, brought from the mysterious island of Ceylon, whispers sweetness into the air. To the medieval mind, it isn't just flavor, it's medicine, perfume, and prayer. It was burned in churches to cleanse the air, mixed into wine to warm the body, and sprinkled into sauces for meats, so that the aroma of dinner resembled incense. Some chroniclers claimed it came from nests of phoenixes or from rivers guarded by giant serpents, and the merchants never corrected them. Mystery was good for business. Ginger, fiery and golden, arrives dried and knotted like small roots of flame. It burns gently on the tongue, sharpens dull broths, and in winter it's stirred into ale or baked into cakes shaped like animals and saints. You picture a housewife somewhere far from the coast, holding one small lump of ginger like a sacred relic, saving it for Christmas. And saffron, that shimmering thread plucked from crocus flowers in distant fields, glows like sunlight trapped in silk. A single handful dyes soup or custard the color of gold, and so it becomes the most theatrical of all spices. It appears in noble feasts, in the kitchens of abbots, in the paints of manuscript artists. But it's fragile, easily faked, easily stolen. Merchants have been caught mixing it with marigold petals and powdered roots, risking their lives for a little profit. To hold real saffron is to hold light itself, fleeting, delicate, divine. The merchant watches as a noble woman approaches, veiled and cautious. She buys a tiny pouch, barely enough to fill a spoon. Her hand trembles as she pays, not from fear but awe. These spices have travelled farther than she ever will. In her kitchen they'll meet honey and wine, almonds and cream, turning ordinary ingredients into dreams. In her husband's eyes it will look like magic. Scholars still debate how far these luxuries trickled down. Most peasants never saw them. Perhaps a pinch of pepper on a feast day, or a single whiff of cinnamon at a church altar. Yet even in the smallest villages, people heard of them. Stories spread of lands where food tasted of warmth and light, where even the poorest might one day hold a grain of paradise in their hand. The legend of flavor was as powerful as the taste itself. But the spice trade had its shadows. Every cent here was bought with risk. Caravans ambushed, sailors drowned, kingdoms ruined by debt, ships burned on the Red Sea, their cargoes vanishing into smoke. Fortunes rose and fell with each storm. To taste nutmeg in a noble hall was to taste the sweat of men who carried it across deserts, through jungles, across oceans haunted by monsoons. Each grain, each thread was the price of a human story. The merchant closes his boxes as the lamps burn low. The scents linger, pepper sharp and clean, cinnamon sweet and warm, saffron glowing faintly even in darkness. You breathe it all in, and you understand that these tiny fragments reshaped not only cooking but civilization itself. They built cities, toppled rulers, redrew maps. They taught Europe to dream of elsewhere. You step back into the night, your clothes carrying the perfume of 100 worlds. Behind you, the merchant locks his chest. Ahead, the stars hang over the rooftops like spilled salt. The thought comes quietly, that all human craving, from comfort to conquest, begins with something small, the desire to make life taste a little better. You walk on, the spice-scented wind fading behind you, and your path leads back toward the flickering lights of an ordinary cottage. Inside, a family gathers around a pot of cabbage and barley, their meal untouched by pepper or saffron, but rich in warmth and company. For them, survival still tastes of smoke, not spice, and yet both belong to the same story. Night has fallen again, and you find yourself at the doorway of a peasant's cottage. It's small and low, built of timber and wattle, the roof sagging under thatch darkened by age. The smell of wood smoke and stew seeps out through the cracks. Inside there's warmth, dim, uneven, alive, and the sound of spoons scraping wooden bowls. You step through the doorway and see what dinner truly means for most of the medieval world. A family of 5 huddles around the hearth, the only source of light. The flames flicker over faces weathered by work. The father's hands cracked from ploughing, the mother's shoulders stooped from grinding grain, the children's hair smelling faintly of smoke and hay. On the fire, an iron pot simmers quietly, its contents thick and brown. This is their pottage, the eternal stew, the same one that boiled yesterday and will boil tomorrow. The father lifts the lid and stirs. Inside are barley, cabbage, a few shreds of dried beans, and perhaps a slice of bacon saved for the week's end. The smell is earthy, simple, comforting. The barley has swollen into soft pearls, the cabbage has melted into the broth, and everything is tinted with a faint haze of smoke. You can almost feel its warmth spreading through the room. On the floor, near the hearth, a round loaf of dark bread rests, heavy and dense. It's made of rye and coarse flour, flecked with bits of bran and stone from the mill. The crust is thick enough to last days, the inside sour and chewy. Each member of the family tears off a piece, dipping it into the stew. The bread softens, soaking up the broth until it becomes part of the meal itself. For the poor bread is never a side dish. It is the table, the spoon, and the blessing. There is no meat feast here, no gilded roast or fragrant spice. Meat is rare, reserved for holidays, weddings, or death feasts. A rabbit snared in the fields, a pigeon caught near the barn. These are small luxuries, eaten quickly and remembered long after. When hunger bites hardest, families turn to the forests and streams for help. Mushrooms, nuts, roots, eels, anything the land will offer. Hunger teaches creativity, and necessity sharpens the palate better than pepper ever could. For drink, there is ale, weak, cloudy, barely alcoholic, brewed at home in small batches. It is safer than water, easier than milk. Children drink it too. The taste is sour, rough, and slightly sweet, flavored by whatever herbs the mother had on hand. Each sip carries a faint memory of grain, fire, and time. You notice a small dish beside the hearth. Onions and leeks, boiled until soft. They glisten faintly in the firelight. Vegetables form the true backbone of the medieval diet. Onions, turnips, carrots, peas, lentils. Meat may have been admired, but beans fed the people. Fields of them stretched across Europe, humble and tireless, turning poor soil into sustenance. They were cheap, filling, and quietly powerful. As you watch the family eat, there's no ceremony, no division of courses, just quiet rhythm. The mother ladles, the father blesses, the children wait. They eat slowly, not out of leisure, but respect. Every spoonful is measured against what remains for tomorrow. When the pot is nearly empty, a little water is added. The broth stretched thinner, the fire burns lower, but the family stays warm. At the edge of the room, hanging from a wooden beam, you notice strings of dried fish, dark and curled. Herring, maybe, bought salted from the market, then soaked and boiled to soften it. Its smell lingers faintly in the air. Beside it, a wheel of hard cheese waits, wrapped in cloth, too precious to touch except in emergencies. The children glance at it sometimes, the way others might glance at the moon, something beautiful, unreachable, but theirs in spirit. The meal ends quietly. The father wipes his hands on his tunic. The mother sets the pot aside to keep warm for morning. The children curl on straw mats, their faces red from firelight. There are no plates to wash, no silver to polish, only silence, warmth, and the sound of crackling wood. In the flicker of the flames, you understand that comfort here is not found in abundance but in repetition. The same pot, the same bread, the same faces, and the knowledge that for tonight at least everyone has eaten. Outside, the night is cold and still. The smell of cooking lingers faintly in the air, mingling with the scent of smoke drifting from chimneys across the village. In each house, the story repeats. Different ingredients, same hunger, same relief, across fields, valleys, and centuries. This scene remains unchanged. And yet in its simplicity lies something eternal. The peasant's table, though bare, was never poor in spirit. It carried laughter, prayer, and the quiet pride of making enough from almost nothing. It is the table that built Europe, one bowl of pottage at a time. The wind sighs outside, and in the distance a bell rings from the monastery. Its echo drifts through the darkness, reminding you that while peasants cooked with barley and smoke, monks were stirring their own pots behind stone walls, in silence, under candlelight, chasing not survival but devotion. You follow the sound of the bell through the misted fields until the outline of a monastery rises ahead. Grey stone against the pale dawn, the air is cool, still carrying the scent of damp earth and hay. Within those walls, life moves according to a rhythm older than memory, the rhythm of prayer, labour, and silence. And somewhere within that silence, the kitchen breathes, a place where nourishment becomes devotion. You step through an archway and enter a long corridor lit only by narrow slits of light. The faint smell of smoke and herbs clings to the air. Ahead, through a low doorway, lies the kitchen. Vast, clean, and hushed. It feels like stepping inside a heartbeat. Rows of cauldrons hang over low fires, their surfaces glowing red in the half-light. Steam rises slowly, curling into halos above the monks' heads. They move quietly, almost reverently, as if every task, chopping leeks, stirring broth, grinding herbs, were a prayer in motion. It's recorded in monastic rules that silence was to be kept even in the kitchen. So here, the language of work replaces speech. The scrape of wooden spoons, the hiss of boiling pots, the rhythm of knives on the chopping block. These sounds form a kind of liturgy, the music of labour sanctified by repetition. You watch as one monk pours thick barley soup into clay bowls, another carries baskets of onions, their skins flaking like parchment. Near the back, a younger brother grinds mustard seeds in a stone mortar, the yellow paste bright against his dark robe. Every movement is deliberate. They are not cooking for pleasure, nor for profit, but for the body that houses the soul. Monastic life followed the rule of Saint Benedict. Ora et labora, pray and work. And in this place, cooking is both. Food is fuel for contemplation, not indulgence. Meals are simple: bread, beans, vegetables, sometimes fish, rarely meat. Spices appear in modest pinches, more for preservation than pleasure. Yet the care poured into each pot is profound. Even austerity has its grace. One fascinating detail preserved in abbey records is how disciplined their kitchens were. Charts marked who stirred, who served, who cleaned the hearth. Ingredients were weighed, water rationed, and leftovers carefully stored. Waste was seen not just as sin, but as ingratitude toward God's gifts. A monk who burned the bread might confess it with the same seriousness as if he had spoken an unkind word. At one long table, you see rows of loaves cooling, coarse, brown, and fragrant. Each loaf bears a cross carved into its crust before baking, blessing the bread before it feeds the brothers. A monk slices one open, and the steam drifts upward like incense. You realize that in this world, eating itself is worship. Every bite is a reminder that life, like bread, is both fragile and sacred. There's a garden beyond the cloister wall, and through the open door you can see it, orderly, fragrant, filled with sage, parsley, fennel, and mint. These herbs are not just for flavor, but for healing. The line between medicine and meal is blurred here. The infirmary cook, a monk with gentle eyes, tends a small pot where herbs steep in warm milk. A remedy for fevers, he explained softly. Even illness is met with food and faith intertwined. And then there is the ale. Monks were Europe's quiet brewers, perfecting recipes through patience and precision. In a nearby room, barrels line the walls, the air thick with the sweet smell of fermenting grain. Brewing was as much an act of stewardship as prayer, a way to preserve clean drink, share it with the poor, and strengthen travelers who sought refuge. To give drink to the thirsty, one monk once wrote, is to refresh Christ himself. The bell tolls again, a soft, resonant note that fills the stone halls. The monks pause, wipe their hands, and bow their heads. The kitchen stills, but the fires keep burning, small flames licking at the pots like votive candles. You realize the rhythm never stops. Prayer flows into labor, labor into nourishment, nourishment into gratitude. When mealtime arrives, the brothers file silently into the refectory. Long tables stretch down the hall, bare save for bread, bowls, and a single candle. They eat in silence while one monk reads aloud from scripture. The words mingle with the faint sounds of chewing and the crackle of the hearth. No one speaks, but everything is understood. In this stillness, eating becomes an act of unity, body and spirit aligned, the world outside forgotten. You sit at the edge of the room and taste a spoonful of the soup, barley, onions, a hint of herbs, warm and humble. It is enough. More than enough. You understand that here, cooking is not merely survival, it is devotion made tangible, grace served in wooden bowls. As the meal ends, the bowls are washed in silence, the fire banked low. Outside, the bells ring again, calling the brothers to prayer. You watch them disappear one by one through the cloister arches, leaving the kitchen empty except for the quiet whisper of the dying flames. You step outside into the courtyard. The air is cool, scented with mint and smoke. In the distance, the village still stirs with ordinary hunger, but here time feels suspended, as if every meal cooked behind these walls has folded into eternity. You look once more at the kitchen door, and realize something profound in this place. The act of cooking has transcended the body. It has become a hymn. The monastery fades behind you, and in the distance the land rises toward a fortress of stone and banners. Torches flicker along its walls. Inside, music and laughter drift through the air. A noble feast is about to begin. Tonight you'll step into a world where food is not mere sustenance but spectacle, power displayed on silver platters, and flavor turned into politics. The great hall glows with firelight. Tapestries ripple in the warm air, and hundreds of candles shimmer on iron chandeliers. The smell alone is intoxicating. Roasted meat, spiced wine, sugar, saffron, and honey mingling into a haze of wealth. Servants rush back and forth carrying dishes so grand they look like theatre props, pies shaped like castles, swans redressed in their own feathers, boars' heads with oranges in their mouths. At the high table, a lord and lady sit beneath a carved canopy, their guests arrayed in ranks below. It's well recorded in the household accounts of the nobility that feasts were both celebration and performance. Each dish was chosen not just for taste but for symbolism. A roasted peacock represented pride, a whole pig, abundance, a tower of jellies, the shimmering order of heaven. Even colour was political. Gold custards dyed with saffron to show wealth, red sauces tinted with sandalwood for spectacle. To eat like this was to announce your place in the world. Behind the hall, the kitchen roars like a forge. Cooks, scullions, and servants move in choreographed chaos, turning spits, basting meats, pounding almonds, grinding pepper. It is said that in the kitchens of great estates, the heat could grow so unbearable that cooks worked half naked, slick with sweat, their skin shining like metal under the firelight. And still, they moved with precision, each step part of a dance perfected through years of service. On one side, an enormous hearth holds 3 spits at once. On the first, a boar turning slowly, its skin blistering gold. On the second, a row of fowls brushed with honey and wine. On the third, a goose stuffed with herbs, chestnuts, and minced fruit, a recipe that took half a day to prepare. Near the hearth, a young turnspit boy cranks the handle, his arms trembling. Each squeak of the spit marks another second of his labor, invisible but vital. The cooks work not just for the lord's stomach, but for his reputation. Chroniclers often wrote more about banquets than battles, who sat closest to the host, what dishes were served first, which guests received gilded cups or plain pewter. The meal was a declaration of order. Hierarchy made edible. Even the seating mattered. Nobles closest to the lord tasted the richest cuts. Those farther down received the thinner stews and scraps. Food, here, was a language of rank. You take a seat near the lower tables, where laughter is freer and manners looser. Trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread, serve as plates. Meat juices soak into them until they become soft enough to eat or toss to servants afterward. Above, a servant pours wine from a golden ewer into silver goblets. It smells of spices, cinnamon, ginger, and clove, the warmth of distant lands bottled into a single sip. A herald steps forward and announces each course with a flourish. First comes a saltelty, an edible sculpture. It's a tower made of sugar, shaped like a knight slaying a dragon, painted with saffron and gold leaf. Gasps fill the room. The sugar cracks as it's cut, revealing a hidden filling of almond cream. Guests applaud. The lord smiles. It isn't just dessert, it's propaganda. To command sugar is to command the world's trade. You glance toward the servant's door and catch a glimpse of what's unseen. The chaos beneath the elegance. Broken crockery, spilled saucers, the sound of shouting. For every elegant dish in the hall, a dozen hands labor in the heat below. The contrast is startling, abundance and exhaustion sharing the same breath. When the next course arrives, venison stewed in red wine and cloves, the smell wraps around the hall like a cloak. Steam rises, candles flicker, and the air hums with conversation. Some guests wipe their fingers on embroidered cloths, others on their sleeves. Etiquette manuals of the time insisted that noble diners not lick their knives, not speak with mouths full, and not use both hands for bread. Small rules to tame the animal joy of feasting. As the evening deepens, minstrels play near the dais, their lutes and fiddles weaving soft music through the noise of clinking cups. The lord raises his goblet, gives a toast to his allies, and the hall erupts in cheer. The walls seem to tremble with life. You realize this isn't simply eating, it's theatre, diplomacy, and celebration rolled into one. A curious record from a 15th century feast describes dishes so extravagant they bordered on illusion. Fish pies that opened to release live birds, fountains of wine flowing from golden lions, even roasted animals reassembled with feathers and fur to look alive again. These spectacles were not about taste. They were about awe, about showing mastery over nature itself. And yet, as the night wanes and the music slows, the spell begins to fade. The torches gutter low, the tables littered with bones, trenchers, and spilled wine. Servants gather the remains, scraping meat from plates, collecting uneaten bread for the poor waiting outside the gates. The feast dissolves into memory, glory and hunger, wealth and waste, all intertwined. You walk out into the cool night air. The castle towers glow faintly against the stars, the smoke of 100 fires curling into the sky. In the distance, peasants sleep in cottages with pots of barley on the hearth. Monks pray over bowls of soup, and across every class the same truth holds: fire, food, and survival bind them all. You breathe deeply, the scent of roasted meat still lingering on the wind. In the medieval world, to cook was to live, but to feast was to proclaim. Every dish, from cabbage broth to gilded goose, told the same story in different tongues: hunger and hope, labor and luxury, the unbroken circle of human need. Tomorrow the fires will be lit again, in halls and hovels alike, and the story, smoky, fragrant, eternal, will begin once more. The castle fades behind you, and the laughter of nobles gives way to the low, solemn toll of church bells. Their sound drifts across the dark countryside, echoing through the fields and over the rooftops of villages still wrapped in mist. It reminds you that in the Middle Ages, food did not belong solely to appetite or wealth. It belonged to time, and time belonged to the church. Every bite, every sip, every feast or fast was part of a sacred rhythm that measured the year not in days, but in devotion. You follow the sound toward a small parish church, its stones damp with morning dew. Inside, candlelight flickers against the faces of villagers gathered for Mass. They are thin, weary, and reverent. Today is Friday, a day of abstinence, and the smell of smoke from cooking fires outside tells you that no meat will be eaten until Sunday. Instead, fish simmers in small pots across the village, salted and stewed, the scent of brine mingling with prayer. It's firmly documented in ecclesiastical decrees that Christians were expected to avoid meat on Fridays, during Lent, and on the vigils of saints, sometimes amounting to nearly half the year. Meat, the flesh of warm-blooded animals, was associated with pleasure and indulgence. Fish, cold and silent, belonged to the realm of humility and restraint. To eat it was to remember sacrifice, to discipline desire, and to align body with soul. You watch a peasant woman tending her pan over a fire. She sprinkles dill and parsley over a small fillet of salted herring, the herbs releasing a sharp, clean scent that fills the air. It's not a feast, but there's beauty in its simplicity. Her children wait patiently, bowls in hand, their eyes reflecting the orange glow of the coals. They don't think of fasting as punishment. It's just life's rhythm, as steady as sunrise. In monasteries and abbeys, fasting took on ritual precision. On fast days, the monks replaced meat with almonds, cheese, vegetables, and fish. They crafted dishes that looked like roasted birds but were sculpted from ground nuts and herbs, or eggs made of almond paste dyed with saffron to resemble yolk and white. These culinary illusions weren't rebellion. They were art in the service of faith, proof that even restraint could inspire creation. Scholars still debate how strictly these rules were followed. Some lords, eager to appear devout yet unwilling to suffer, built fish ponds on their estates, ensuring fresh catches year-round. Others stretched the definition of fish until it included creatures like beavers and even barnacle geese, thought wrongly to hatch from driftwood or sea foam. In such logic, faith and convenience danced together under the same roof. And then came Lent, 40 days of near-constant hunger. The kitchens grew quieter, the stews thinner, and the mood more somber. Fires burned lower, conserving wood and energy, and the smell of cooking lost its warmth. People turned inward, their diets reflecting their prayers: bread without butter, broth without meat, and water where ale once stood. It was a shared emptiness, one that united peasants, monks, and nobles alike. But when Easter finally arrived, the silence broke. Bells pealed across the land, ovens blazed again, and tables overflowed with meat, ale, and sweet cakes. It wasn't just celebration, it was release, a return to joy after endurance. The fast and the feast were two halves of the same truth. Without hunger, there could be no gratitude. You imagine a village green on Easter morning. The air smells of roasting lamb, of honey and bread. Children laugh, running with baskets of eggs dyed in herbs and soot. The priest blesses the meal, sprinkling holy water over loaves, hams, and cakes shaped like crosses. The entire village eats together, the memory of hunger sharpening the sweetness of every bite. The church calendar didn't just dictate meals, it gave meaning to them. Advent's restraint, Lent's hardship, Easter's abundance, harvest's gratitude. Each season taught people to see food not as a constant possession but as a gift that ebbed and flowed with divine rhythm. Even the humblest peasant understood this cycle. A thin bowl of barley soup on a fast day wasn't despair, it was faith in motion. A roast shared at Christmas wasn't greed, it was thanksgiving for survival. In this world, every flavor carried theology. Salt symbolized purity, bread the body of Christ, wine his blood, fish his followers, herbs the green of rebirth. Eating was never only physical, it was prayer disguised as habit. You step outside again as dusk deepens. The bell rings once more, marking the evening meal. Across fields and villages, fires awaken, some roaring, some faint. You smell fish roasting, bread warming, ale bubbling, and for a moment the whole of Christendom feels united by the same invisible table, from the poorest monk to the richest king, all eating under the same clock of heaven. You realize that in medieval times food didn't simply fill the stomach, it shaped the soul. To fast was to learn patience. To feast was to learn gratitude. To eat was to remember that life, like bread, was both sacred and brief. The stars bloom above you, silent and endless, while below the kitchens glow once more. Tomorrow will bring another rule, another meal, another prayer. But for tonight, the world feels full. The evening bell fades into the mist, and as you walk downhill from the church, a new sound takes its place. The soft lap of water against wooden piers, the shouts of traders calling prices across the dark. You've reached the heart of medieval appetite. The river, without its silver scales and briny breath, half of Europe would have gone hungry. The air is damp, alive with the smell of mud, fish and smoke. Lanterns sway on the docks like tiny moons, lighting faces slick with work and salt. You pause beside a row of wicker baskets glistening in torchlight. Inside, eels twist lazily, their bodies shining like wet ropes. Their movement is hypnotic, a living currency. To modernize, it's strange, but in the Middle Ages, eel was gold, eaten fresh, salted, smoked, traded, even used to pay rent. Monasteries owned entire fisheries dedicated to them. In England alone, millions were caught each year, their slippery bodies winding through the economy like threads of survival. Further down the quay, barrels of salted herring are being rolled onto carts. The men grunt, the wood creaks and brine splashes onto the stones. The herring trade was a miracle of endurance. Vast fleets sailing across the North Sea and Baltic, filling casks that fed nations. Some historians call it the medieval world's oil industry, a fuel that kept Europe alive through endless fast days. Without these fish, stored by the million, no church calendar could have been obeyed, no winter endured. You step closer to a fishmonger's stall, where fresh catches shimmer on wooden planks, perch, carp, pike and tench, their scales still wet from the river. Behind him hangs a rack of dried cod, hard as driftwood, pale as parchment. The cod trade reached across oceans from northern seas to southern markets, long before Columbus ever dreamed of sailing west. Each slab of dried fish was a promise that hunger could be postponed. A woman approaches, her basket half empty. Her eyes tired, she haggles softly for a small carp. The fishmonger nods, wraps it in rushes and hands it over. Her family will stew it in ale tonight, maybe with leeks and a pinch of parsley if she can spare it. The recipe hasn't changed in centuries. Simple, slow, honest. You walk along the water and notice how the river itself is part of the kitchen. Every monastery, manor and village depended on it not just for fish but for freshness. In the absence of ice, cooks kept eels alive in barrels, carp swimming in ponds, oysters packed in damp straw. The goal was not preservation by cold, but preservation by patience to keep life alive until it could be eaten. The monasteries were the true masters of this craft. Their ponds, engineered miracles, dotted the landscape like jewels. Dug deep and layered with clay, they held water year-round, breeding carp and tench for fast days. You imagine a monk in a brown robe scattering crumbs from the shore, the surface rippling as fish rise in quiet devotion. To him this was both sustenance and stewardship, a living parable of care. And yet, for all their piety, monks sometimes bent the rules creatively. When fasting forbade meat, they declared certain creatures to be fish, including beavers because of their tails, and barnacle geese, which were thought to grow from driftwood. Faith and hunger have always found their compromises. The smell of the docks grows stronger now. Salt, smoke, and the faint sweetness of decay. You hear knives on wood as fishmongers clean their catch, scales scattering like silver dust. The water reflects their movements, trembling with candlelight. Somewhere nearby, A cat yowls and steals a sardine from a bucket. No one bothers to chase it. There's enough work for all. Fish wasn't just food, it was identity. Inland towns measured distance by how far fish could travel before spoiling. Trade routes were drawn by the tide, diets shaped by proximity to rivers or coasts. Even names carried it. Fisher, salmon, pike, memories of a life bound to water. As the night deepens, fires flicker along the riverbanks. Men sit with rods, their silhouettes dark against the gleam of the current. They fish not for pleasure, but for survival. You watch a father and son pull in a small net. The boy laughs when he sees a wriggling perch inside, his face glowing in the firelight. It's a moment of triumph, brief and pure. Tomorrow they'll eat. Somewhere upriver, a great monastery tolls its bell for evening prayers. Downstream, a merchant ship sets sail, its hold full of salted cod bound for markets a continent away. Between them, the river carries everything: hunger, labor, faith, and fortune, winding like a single endless meal through the heart of medieval Europe. You stand at the edge of the water and breathe in its damp, living scent. To medieval people, this wasn't just a river. It was salvation, shimmering, slippery, and sacred. And as you watch its dark surface ripple under the moonlight, you understand why they built their kitchens beside it, why they prayed over it, why they trusted it with their lives. The water moves on, whispering of the next dawn, when the market will open again, when fresh fish will glitter on the tables, and when the eternal balance between faith, hunger, and the sea will begin anew. The sound of the river fades as you walk inland again, following the winding streets of a small medieval town. It's evening now, and the air is thick with a warm, yeasty scent, the unmistakable perfume of brewing. Somewhere ahead, someone is singing, off-key but joyful, and soon you find yourself standing before a timber-framed tavern, its sign swaying gently in the breeze. The frothy tankard. Inside, the light spills golden onto the muddy street. You push open the door and step into another kind of hearth, one that doesn't cook food but warms spirits. The tavern is alive with laughter, wooden mugs clinking, and the low hum of voices softened by drink. Men and women sit shoulder to shoulder on rough benches, their faces flushed from ale and firelight. You realize that in the Middle Ages, this was as vital as the kitchen, a place where thirst met survival, and every sip was safer than a cup of water. It's recorded in manorial and monastic accounts that water, though abundant, was rarely trusted. Wells ran close to latrines, streams to pastures, and contamination was a quiet, invisible killer. So the solution was simple and brilliant: boil it, ferment it, and turn danger into comfort. Thus, the medieval world ran on ale. The drink in your hand is small ale, cloudy, pale, mildly sour, barely stronger than modern lemonade. It's brewed from malted barley and boiled with herbs like yarrow or horehound. Children drink it freely, as do labourers, monks, and grandmothers. It's nourishment as much as drink, a liquid form of bread giving calories and hydration in one swallow. You take a sip and taste the faint bitterness of the malt, the smokiness of the fire it was dried over. It's not refined, but it's alive. At the far end of the room, an alewife, a woman brewer, tends to a great wooden vat, stirring the mash with a long paddle. Steam curls around her as she works. Brewing was often women's labour, passed down through generations, just like cooking or weaving. They knew the rhythms of fermentation by heart, when to stir, when to skim, when to trust the scent rising from the pot. In towns, some women sold their brew from home, hanging a broom or a branch over the door to signal fresh ale. It wasn't luxury, it was livelihood. Cider came next, the drink of the orchards. In regions thick with apple trees, presses creaked through autumn nights, squeezing juice into wooden barrels. Fermentation began quietly in the cold. The result was crisp, slightly sweet, and endlessly drinkable. On harvest days, cider was celebration in liquid form, sharp enough to wake the tongue, soft enough to share with children. In Normandy, Devon, and countless hidden valleys, cider became both prayer and payment, a measure of the year's generosity. Wine, though, belonged to another world. Imported from the sunlit vineyards of southern France and Italy, it was the drink of abbots and nobles, not peasants. Monasteries perfected its storage, aging it in cool cellars and blessing it in chalices. At noble feasts, wine was more than pleasure. It was prestige, poured from silver jugs into goblets carved with saints and lions. It was often spiced with cinnamon, cloves, and honey, creating hippocras, a drink both medicinal and magnificent. Still, even wine obeyed the church's rhythm. During Lent or Advent, nobles might switch to thin ale or watered cider, both penance and show. At Easter they'd return to crimson cups brimming with joy. You turn your gaze to the tavern again. The air is warm and heavy, thick with the smell of sweat, smoke, and malt. Someone strums a lute in the corner. Two men argue over taxes. A third laughs so hard his drink spills into the rushes on the floor. It's chaotic, alive, utterly human. In a world ruled by hunger and prayer, this was one of the few places where laughter could drown both out for a while. A curious historical detail: in some taverns you didn't pay by the mug but by the candle. You'd hand the innkeeper a coin, and he'd light a stub of wax. You could drink freely until it burned out. When the flame died, so did your time. You imagine the quiet panic of men gulping faster as the candle shrinks, each drop of ale a race against wax and time. Outside, the air is cool again. The tavern door creaks shut behind you, but the scent of fermentation lingers on your clothes. Malt, yeast, smoke, a whisper of joy. You think about how strange it is that the same drink that dulled pain also kept people alive. That ale and cider, humble as they were both medicine and communion. And somewhere far away, in a monastery cellar, a monk checks a barrel of ale, lifting the lid to watch the bubbles rise. He smiles quietly, knowing it will be shared tomorrow, not in laughter, but in prayer. Two worlds joined by the same drink, divided only by intent. You look up at the night sky. It's clear and cold. The stars shimmer like drops of cider caught in candlelight. And for a moment you understand. The medieval world didn't run on wine or grain or gold. It ran on warmth, on the small comfort of a drink shared beside a fire, the laughter that followed, and the hope that tomorrow's brew would be ready before the water turned foul again. The wind carries away the tavern songs behind you, but the rhythm of clinking mugs remains, faint and steady, like the heartbeat of the Middle Ages itself. The tavern's laughter fades behind you, replaced by the soft creak of a cottage door. Inside, the light is dim, and a single fire burns low, its glow casting gold across the dirt floor. A woman kneels by the hearth, her hands steady though her face is tired. The air smells of onions, barley, and smoke. Not feast food, but the scent of daily life. Tonight, as most nights, she cooks for everyone but herself. In the Middle Ages, the hearth was a woman's world, a space where survival was shaped quietly, without ceremony, one pot at a time. The records barely mention her name, but her work filled every hour of the day, fetching water, grinding grain, kneading bread, brewing ale, stirring stews, nursing children, mending, tending, enduring. While kings dined and monks prayed, she kept the fire alive, and without that fire nothing else would have. You watch her as she lifts a heavy iron pot with bare hands calloused by years of heat. The broth inside hisses softly. Her youngest child clings to her skirts, sleepy and soot-streaked. Her eldest helps grind barley on a quern, the slow rasp of stone on stone filling the room with rhythm. This is not a moment of peace. It's work disguised as warmth. Historians often write of medieval feasts and markets, but rarely of this, the quiet orchestra of chores that filled a peasant woman's day. Before dawn she would light the hearth, blowing gently on the embers banked overnight. She'd milk the cow, skim cream for butter, wash clothes in icy water, and still be home before the pot boiled over. Her body was the rhythm of the house, her footsteps the clock that marked the day. Cooking was dangerous work. The open hearth demanded constant attention. Wool skirts brushed too close to sparks. Hot fat spat without warning. Cauldrons toppled with a wrong pull of the chain. Parish records tell of burns so severe they left lifelong scars. Some women even died by fire, their names entered in the same ink as lost crops or broken tools, part of the daily cost of survival. And yet she moved with a kind of grace, honed by habit. She could turn scraps into meals, herbs into medicine, and patience into art. With no recipes, she cooked by instinct, tasting with her fingers, measuring by handful, trusting memory instead of tools. When meat was scarce, she flavored broth with bones. When bread grew stale, she softened it into soup. Every meal was improvisation, a quiet negotiation with scarcity. A curious note appears in medieval poetry, jokes about housewives burning stews, alewives watering beer, and women scolding their husbands by the fire. Behind the laughter lies acknowledgement. Everyone knew who ran the home. The men worked the fields, yes, but the women kept hunger at bay. Their labor was invisible only because it never stopped long enough to be seen. You glance around the room. The walls are darkened by soot, the beams above strung with drying herbs, sage, thyme, marigold, lavender. Their scent mixes with the smoke, clean, green, alive. In a corner, a small cradle rocks gently as the woman hums, her voice low, the same melody her mother sang. The song isn't for joy, it's for rhythm, a way to measure time while hands stay busy. When the family eats, she serves everyone first, husband, children, elders, then takes what remains. Sometimes, only the thinnest broth, but she eats without complaint. Hunger, to her, is not tragedy but routine. She's known it since childhood, and expects no less. Yet the act of serving, of feeding, of keeping others whole, it gives her power, quiet power, but real. The hearth answers to her alone. On feast days, her hands create miracles. Honey fritters fried golden, loaves scored with crosses, pies filled with leeks and cheese. For a brief moment, she is an artist. Her kitchen, a chapel of scent and steam. The same hands that scrub and mend can decorate a crust with care, transforming survival into something close to beauty. And when sickness strikes, she becomes the healer. Her herbs steep in warm ale. Her poultices smell of garlic and honey. She prays as she stirs, whispering words older than scripture. The line between cook and caretaker vanishes. To feed is to heal is to love. You notice her eyes, lined, weary, but fierce. She looks into the fire, watching it shift from orange to red, and for a moment she seems timeless. Every mother, wife, and daughter of the Middle Ages lives within that gaze. Countless lives spent beside countless hearths, their warmth passed down like inheritance. When she finally lies down, the fire still flickers. She banks it carefully with ash, so it will survive the night. If the embers die, she'll have to borrow flame from a neighbor, an act of dependence she'd rather avoid. So she guards it like treasure, that little pulse of light that means her family will eat again tomorrow. You step outside, the door closing softly behind you. Smoke curls from the chimney into the cold night air, carrying the smell of barley and herbs. Across the valley, other fires glow, hundreds of small lives burning against the dark. None of these women's names will be written in chronicles, yet their work endures more surely than any king's. You look back once more. The hearth still burns, steady and patient, a heartbeat in stone and ash. And you understand, if the medieval world had a soul, it wasn't in the cathedral or the castle. It was here, in the hands of women who cooked, cared, and kept the fire alive. By the late Middle Ages, the humble kitchen had evolved into an empire, from the smoky hearths of cottages to the roaring fire pits of castles. Cooking had become both a craft and a calling, a skill that could command respect, wealth, and even fear. The scent of roasting meat and spiced wine had turned from survival to spectacle, and in the heart of Europe's growing cities, the cooks themselves began to rise. You walk now through the narrow lanes of a medieval town, where signs hang over doorways, a knife, a loaf, a pot. This is the quarter of the guilds, tailors, butchers, bakers, brewers, and cooks. The clamour of hammers and the clang of bells echo through the fog. But from one open window drifts a sweeter sound, the bubbling of broth, the hiss of fat, the rhythm of knives chopping fast and sure. Inside, a master cook is at work. He is no peasant, no servant bending by a smoky hearth. His sleeves are rolled high, his knives honed bright, his face slick with steam. Around him apprentices hurry, one grinding pepper, another shaping pastry, a third feeding logs into the oven. Every motion is part of a ritual older than their names. For centuries, cooking had been survival. Now it is art. Guild records from the 14th century show that these cooks were powerful. They held secrets, blends of spice, methods of preservation, sauces that transformed dull meat into velvet. Apprentices trained for years before they were allowed to stir a noble's stew. The best were summoned to courts and cathedrals, sworn to silence about their recipes. Their hands turned food into fame, and fame into coin. In great cities like Paris and London, the banquet masters became legends. They designed feasts that lasted for days, menus with dozens of dishes, processions of meats, sweet pies shaped like crowns, towers of jellies trembling like stained glass. They understood that food could do what words could not: inspire awe, silence enemies, win alliances. The medieval feast had become a form of diplomacy, and its chefs were its secret diplomats. But their kitchens were not peaceful. The noise, the heat, the chaos, these were their symphonies. The clang of cauldrons, the shouts of assistants, the roar of fires. It was a kind of battle, waged daily with knives and flames. And when the dishes finally reached the hall, gleaming on silver, carried high before nobles and guests, the cooks did not dine. They watched from the shadows, unseen but triumphant. You follow one such banquet from the kitchens to the hall. The doors open, light spilling like liquid gold. Musicians strike their chords, servants march in procession, and the scent of meat, honey, and spice floods the air. The cook stands apart, sweat cooling on his brow, and smiles faintly. His work will be gone within the hour, devoured, praised, forgotten. But for that brief, shimmering moment, he commands the senses of every soul in the room. And then, as the years pass, everything changes again. The Renaissance dawns. Fire gives way to refinement. The old guild secrets turn into recipes. Written for the first time, kitchens move from smoky corners to dedicated rooms with chimneys and shelves. Spice, once treasure, becomes common. The cook's art begins its long journey toward modern cuisine. Yet something remains the same. Whether peasant or monk, noble or guildmaster, all were bound by the same simple truth. The act of cooking is the act of care. It is the alchemy of turning the earth into sustenance, labour into warmth, hunger into hope. Every fire lit against the cold, every bowl filled and passed by hand is part of the same story, the one that fed humanity through its darkest nights. You step outside one last time. The town sleeps. The smell of smoke lingers, soft and sweet, hanging over rooftops like memory. In the silence, you can almost hear the heartbeat of every kitchen that ever was, the crackle of logs, the simmer of pots, the whisper of prayers over bread. History will remember kings, wars, and saints, but somewhere beneath their stories lies this quieter truth, that the world endured not by power or conquest, but by the endless patience of those who fed it. The nameless women tending fires, the monks stirring their barley soup, the merchants hauling salt fish across frozen seas, the cooks who served and never sat. The medieval kitchen, smoky, humble, holy, was the true cathedral of survival. Its altar was the hearth, its relics were wooden spoons, and its prayers whispered in the steam of every pot were always the same. May there be warmth, may there be bread, may we endure another winter. The fire flickers low. You listen to it fade, then close your eyes. The world sleeps, and history exhales.